Hello friends, Bill here. In front of us is a 1964 Featherweight that belongs to a customer. She actually bought this recently in an eBay auction, and she had the seller ship it directly to me. She called me up and told me what she had done and asked me if I would go through this machine, look it over, assess it, and take care of whatever issues it might need so she can put it to use. And so that's what she did. This machine just arrived. I've bought machines on eBay before, and you can never be sure how they're going to be packaged by the seller. This seller did a very good job in packaging it very well, so it didn't suffer any damage getting here. It's complete. It has the case. It's the correct case, the foot controller, the wiring. This is the accessories box with the accessories in it. And the correct vintage owner's manual. So she got a nice complete machine. So what we're going to do, I haven't done anything with this thing. I haven't taken the covers off. I haven't plugged it in. So we're going to do that on camera. So I'm going to reset the camera so you can see a little more closely. And let's size this thing up and see how well Catherine did in buying this 1964 Featherweight. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just kind of look over the whole thing. I'm going to move the accessories and manual and stuff out of the way. We'll look at the case separately. But just sizing up the machine, the finish appears to be in good condition. There are black marks from where the foot controller was setting in it like this, and the rubber has left marks, which tells me that the rubber cushions on the bottom of the foot controller need to be replaced. The rubber shouldn't be leaving marks on this. So one of the things I'm going to recommend to Catherine is that I go through the foot controller, take it apart, and replace those rubber feet on it. The wiring appears to be in good shape. Let's cut this zip tie here. I haven't plugged this thing in. I never plug them in until after I've had a chance to look at the wiring and decide if it's in good shape. Now, these white Featherweights, which started in 1961 and ended around 1966, these were all made in Scotland, and Singer switched the type of wire to a more modern plastic jacketed wire. So the machines that were made in the Anderson, South Carolina plant, that's the 301s and the 400 series and the 500 series in the 1950s, all used this plastic wiring, which holds up really, really well. In fact, even though it's 60 years old, 62 years old, or 63 years old, it's in very good shape, and I don't see any reason to recommend replacing the wiring. So let me go ahead and plug this in, and let's see what we got. All right, so the light does work. It's got an incandescent bulb in there. I'm going to replace that with an LED bulb. These incandescent bulbs generate a lot of heat and just not that efficient. So we'll go with an LED bulb in there, but that's working. I'm going to just back off the control here. All right, we can hear that the motor is working. Sounds like it's not running quite the speed that I'd like to hear it. It's probably going to be worth taking this motor apart, cleaning out the inside. I see when I look around the motor and belt, there's lots of bits of black from belts. So, and this has got one of those horrible rubber belts that, the real stretchy ones that, more universal fit. I'm not going to keep that on there. We're going to put a proper belt on here. But I'm going to recommend to Catherine that we go ahead and take the motor off, take it apart, clean it out, polish the commutator, put new grease wicks in it and lubricate it, and put it back together so she has a trouble-free motor. Again, I'm going to recommend an LED light in there. Also looking at the bed, you can see has masking tape that's very well dried out. I don't like seeing that on there because it can be hard to remove that without scratching the bed. So what I'll be doing is scraping away at that, not with a metal-edged scraper because you can scratch the paint doing that. I use hard plastic pieces. The edge of a credit card is actually a very good way to try to get some of these bits of tape off of there. And then I'm going to follow up with kerosene, which is a solvent that does not harm the finish, and hopefully will soften that residue, and I can get it all off of there. I see the same right here. There was probably a sticker from a local sewing shop at one point that'd been on there, and there's a shadow from the adhesive there, so we'll want to get that off of there. And of course the rubber marks from the foot controller being stored there. But other than that, the paint is in really nice shape. No scratches on the bed. The front edge of the bed, which is often where you see the most damage, looks really, really good. I see on the back there's some kind of a, I don't know what that is, some kind of a shmoo, as Bob Fowler would call it. And there's a little bit of it on the cord. That might be dried, some kind of dried polishing compound. I'm not sure, but we'll get that off of there and clean that up. All right, let's open it up and see what kind of condition we have under the covers. So the front cover comes right off, and I can see a little bit of rust on the needle bar clamp, but there's a little bit of oil on the needle bar. So the front end is not dry. It's turning with very little friction, which is great. And the lifter is all working. So the front end, I think, just needs a little cleanup. I'll want to clean that rust off of there. We'll clean this out as best we can, and then correctly lubricate things. But I think the nose of the machine, I'm happy with the condition there. Let's take the top off here. The screw has been a little bit chowdered on the top, as you can see there. I'm gonna clean that up. So I'll file those edges that are lifted on there, and then we'll repolish that screw, and it'll look fine. The cover's in great shape. Sometimes the needle pin is bent. That one appears to be at a little bit of an angle, but I'm not going to try to straighten it because I can crack the cover doing that. All right, inside here, of course, on the non-white featherweights, there's a gear set here and a gear set underneath. But on the white featherweights, the power is transmitted from the upper shaft to the lower shaft with a belt, and there's a notched pulley there for the belt, and there's the belt. And the belt looks to be in very good shape. There's the original Singer part number on the belt, so I see no issues there. The shaft itself appears to be completely dry. This cap for the connecting rod is dry. I see no evidence of oil in there, so this machine definitely needs to be lubricated. But again, it's turning well, and I don't see any problems. By the way, the hand wheel, very often the edges of the hand wheel have all kinds of nicks on them. And that's sometimes from rings. You know, you have rings on your fingers and you're grabbing the hand wheel. You can put little chips in there. But this hand wheel looks to be in virtually perfect condition. That's beautiful. So cosmetically, this white featherweight is quite nice. So let's go to the bottom. The cover on the bottom on these white featherweights, they went to kind of a black masonite material, and there's no felt drip pad on it. So when we take this off, yeah, you can see there's the masonite. We got some lint and things on there, and there's a bit of a drip from whatever they used that left that little spill on the back. Some of it's on here too. And all right, as we look underneath here, I see a little bit of rust. That's this thing here is the counterbalance for the hook. So the hook, the amount of metal in the hook is not evenly distributed around it, so one side of the hook is heavier than the other, and to keep that from causing a vibration when you sew, Singer put this counterbalance on the shaft here, which is why it looks kind of lopsided. So it is exactly opposite the corresponding weight on the hook, and that's what keeps the machine from vibrating. So all that looks good, except I want to get that rust off of there. The points where it needs oil on the shafts here and on the rock shafts, are very dry, so it definitely needs lubrication. But underneath, I'm seeing a quite clean condition on the bottom side of this machine. So again, that's very, very good. This is the way the wiring connects. Singer was using these crimp connectors. So when I take the motor out, I'll have to clip these crimp connectors off, and I have a supply of these correct crimp connectors. So when I put the motor back in, I'll be able to crimp it with these same type of connectors, and it'll look exactly as it did from the factory. So these are, this pair here are the ones coming from the motor, and so I'll be cutting those to get at the motor. All right, so generally speaking, it looks like Catherine ended up getting a quite nice machine. I don't see anything wrong. The upper tension assembly looks good. I didn't pull out the bobbin case here. Let's look at the bobbin case. All right, it's a Semenko bobbin case, which is very important. Sometimes the original bobbin cases are not there, and it has one of the Chinesium ones, which aren't as good. But this appears to be in very nice shape, a little dirty. Again, in order to get this in really good operating condition for Catherine, I'll be taking this hook assembly off. I'll show you I'll show you that process. I'm going to be taking the hook off, disassembling the components of the hook, cleaning and polishing, and the same with the bobbin case. The places where the thread is passing need to be really smooth, free of any nicks or scratches, and polished nicely, so that you get really good operation. And so the bobbin case and the hook, and then up here around the needle and so forth, I'll be cleaning up all of that. I'm seeing, by the way, that the needle is in wrong. A needle has on a featherweight, well, every needle has a flat side, and on that flat side, the shape of the needle is different. So that when the needle goes down into the fabric and starts to come back up, that slack in the fabric creates a loop underneath, and that's what the hook, as the hook comes around, that hook is grabbing that bit of thread that's now slack next to the needle. So that's why, if you look closely at these needles, there's a divot in the needle, and it corresponds with the flat spot on here. And this needle, the needle on a featherweight, the flat side should be facing that way, kind of matching the shape of the needle plate. And this one was in backwards, which means that this would not have been sewing quite right, because the hook would have a harder time grabbing that loop of thread, because it's not, because the needle's got the wrong side facing. So that little cutout in the needle creates a space for the hook was on the wrong side. So we'll fix that. Again, that's minor. That's just a matter of someone not being familiar with the correct procedure. All right, so the machine, for keeping track here, we're going to take the motor out and clean the motor. I've got some rust to clean up. I'll take the hook and bobbin case and clean those. I'll do a little bit of cleaning and rust removal in the nose area and lubricate that. We need to get the masking tape off and the glue residue there, and then just polish up the painted surfaces. And I think, and then we'll take the foot controller apart, put new rubber feet on the foot controller. And then this featherweight, I think, is going to be in quite nice shape. The case, let's just switch positions here, bring the case forward. The case looks quite nice. The handle, I see no tears anywhere in it or on the bottom. The feet are not rusty, which means it was not stored in a damp location. That's all great. It's just a little dirty, which is often the case. So I will scrub this case out with hot soapy water. Whoops, I see we need to do a little bit of gluing. This is loose, so we'll re-glue that down. There's a little bit of a snag on the inside that I can fix, but generally this case looks excellent. So not too much to do to get this featherweight back into what I would call really, really excellent condition and ready for Catherine to use. So stay tuned, and I'll show you, what I'm doing to get the tape off and clean up the parts that we've already talked about. All right, so this is the motor off of Catherine's 1964 white Featherweight. You can see that there's bits of rubber from the belt on there a little bit. Here's the wiring I clipped coming out of the bottom of the machine. This plastic wire is in really good shape. There's no cracks. It's supple. So there's absolutely no reason to replace that wire. But let's open this motor up and see what it looks like inside. I'm going to start by removing the brushes. So we'll take these plastic caps off. Pull the brush out. That brush is worn down a bit. I always replace the brushes. I know people that look at that and say, oh, there's plenty of life left in that brush, but you know, it's not that expensive. I'm going to all the trouble of taking the motor apart. I'm just going to put a new set of brushes in, not a big expense. So we'll get the other brush out. Yeah, about the same. Okay, we'll take the little motor pulley off here, and that's this little screw right here on the end, and then the pulley on these white Featherweights is Bakelite, and it's easily broken, so you got to be careful about that. Some of these have a, and this might be one of those type where the little, yes, the little screw that holds this on is not just tightening against the shaft, but there's actually a hole in the shaft. So you know, normally on the earlier Featherweights, you can just loosen the screw and slide it off because there's a flat on the shaft. This has got, I don't know how well that shows, but the shaft has no flat, but it's got a threaded hole there, and and this little screw goes right in. So we got to be careful about that. Okay, so now we can open the motor itself by taking out two screws that hold the two end caps of the motor together. There's one of them. And what I expect I'm going to find is just a lot of carbon deposits in the motor. We give a little gentle twist, and there we are. And now I'm able to, okay, so there's the shaft of the motor. We can see the commutator is definitely dirty, but the inside of the motor is pretty clean. There's the little fiber washers on the shaft. There's two on this end and two on this end. So sometimes there's one on one end and two on the other. They tend to vary. So I will be polishing up those copper commutator points. That's the path, the electrical path, to get to the motor to spin. So it's important that be in good shape. There is no rubber grommet on these white Featherweights. There's just an opening in the case. And then let's take the other side of the motor off. Okay, there's the cover. This is the field coil, and if I push those brush tubes out, which I don't need to do because I can clean this pretty easily. There is actually not a lot of carbon build up in there, but so I'll clean that out. Generally speaking, I'm happy with the condition of the inside of this motor, so will not be difficult to get it cleaned up. The other thing we want to take out are the grease wicks, and we'll just push that down and pick the grease wick out. Okay, so there is the grease wick. It is completely dry. No grease on it. In fact, it doesn't even have any residue of grease, so that's not good, which means the shaft was not getting any lubrication. And there's the little spring. Let me try to get the spring out. Okay, so there is the spring for the grease wick. And we'll do the same on this cap here. We'll just push the grease wick through. Come on. Whoops. And actually this is even better. That little sleeve contains the grease wick and the spring. And this grease wick, wow, was actually stuck. It was so dried that it was stuck. And now we've got that out. So I'm going to be putting new felt grease wicks in there. And so there we have it, ready to clean these parts. So when I come back, I'll have these parts cleaned up, and we'll reassemble the motor and test it out. All right, I've got everything cleaned here, and the motor is ready to reassemble. I do the cleaning off camera. I don't think it's very exciting to show you cleaning parts, but just let me so you can see. This is the two sets of motor covers. On the white Featherweights, they're actually made of it's like a Bakelite that's been painted. So I've cleaned these, and I actually took some polishing compound and brightened up the paint so they're nice and shiny. When it's all back together, I'll wax it when I wax the rest of the machine. There's the core of the motor. I've polished and buffed the shafts where they go through the bearings on my buffing wheel. And then I put this in. I have a small jeweler's lathe, and I chuck this in the lathe. And while it's turning, I polish up the commutator bars using fine nail files, foam nail files. And so that's been nicely polished up. And then I spray it with non-contact cleaner. So this is ready to go. This is the field coils, and these are the brush tubes. And it's easy to forget that you really want to thoroughly clean the brush tubes as well. I run a brass brush through them repeatedly to get the insides nice and shiny, because the brushes go inside of here and make contact with the commutator bars. And so the electrical path is coming from the field coil into this brush tube. It's transferring the electricity to the sides of the carbon brushes. So if the inside of the brush tubes are not nice and clean and shiny, you don't make good contact with the brushes. And then that in turn makes contact here at the commutator bars. So that's what the electrical path is. We want to make sure that's nice and clean. So I've scrubbed with these and used a brass brush. And then this magnetic bowl has all of the other parts. I've cleaned everything. I've actually tossed out the old grease wicks. I buy from McMaster Carr this felt, round felt, and I've clipped off 2 pieces to make new grease wicks with, and the grease wick springs are here. These 2 parts here, these chrome pieces, are the caps where the grease wicks go. And I like to take these out, because then I can really clean out this cavity and get if there's any old grease in there, you can get that all out. And same thing with the inside of these. And that allows me to assemble the motor and then put the grease wicks in last, which makes it easier that way, in my opinion. And then here's the old brushes. I'm going to install a new set of brushes. I buy my brushes from the Featherweight shop. And if you can see here, the length of the brushes tells you how much. So these are worn about 25% of their maximum service life. Actually, you wouldn't want to wear them all the way to the bottom. So even though there's some life left in these, I always replace the brushes. These are, you'll notice the springs are nice and long on the replacements for the Featherweight shop, which I think is an advantage, because it provides plenty of contact pressure, because these brushes actually go against this commutator, and you want plenty of good contact there. So the nice longer springs on the Featherweight shop replacements really work great. I actually did a little test one time. I took an old set and put them in and started up the motor and kind of listened to how fast it was running, and I took them out and immediately put in a set of these, and the motor spun faster. There was no question that the motor actually ran a little bit faster. I don't have a good explanation for that. In theory, it shouldn't make that much of a difference, but I think the fact that they have the longer springs that make a really good contact with the commutator, and the fact that they're not worn at all on the sides, so they're making really good contact with the brush tubes, all combined just give you a great performance. So again, I like to put the new brushes in every time. So let's put this back together. It's ready to go. I'm going to start by putting the brush tubes back into the end cap here. Now it's easy to get this backwards. I'm going to be doing it this way because you'll see the vents here and you see the vents on this side. Well, there's a larger slot on the vent end for the wires to come through. So when you look at it that way, you realize that it goes this way and not this way. So I'm going to put the brown brush tube in at the top, or actually that's actually the bottom. And once I get it lined up, push that up through. Same thing with the other brush tube. And when these go in, there's a tab that the wire is soldered onto, and that goes off to the side. So the brush tube, you don't want to put them in differently than the factory did, because you risk that the tube would make contact with something that it shouldn't be contacting, and that would certainly be a problem. It's a little tough getting your fingers into this thing because you're working with not much length on the wire. Come on, you. So once those are in, we want to push the wires in and put that half of the field coil onto the end cap, like that. And now I'm going to hold this the way this motor is going to sit on the machine like this. So we can now put the outer cover on. I don't want to get it backwards. I don't want the writing reading the wrong way. So visualizing this helps. We'll slip that on. And, oops. Come on. This has a insulating sleeve that makes it a little trickier than the black featherweights don't have that piece of waxed insulating layer there. Okay. So now that is on. Now what I'm going to do before I put the motor core through is I'm going to feed the wires through the end cap. All right, so now we're ready to put the washers back on. And on the other end. Okay. And I'm going to slip this in. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Before I do that, I'm going to put just a touch of grease on the shaft of the motor. And I use the So Retro grease from the Featherweight shop, which is excellent. And I'm just going to smear that around just to get a light layer on the shaft, so when it's in the bushings, sliding in through the bushings, it's got a little bit of lubricant on it. Of course, over time, the grease wicks will handle that function. All right, that's in and spinning freely. And then I think it helps to be doing a kind of a twisting motion with this. First, I got to get that. There we go. You get it on, and then you twist it back so that the wire can come through. And there it is. It's back together. We make sure that the Motor spins freely, it does. We can drop these 2 screws in. Okay, and we just check and make sure that the motor is spinning freely, which it is. That's great. Now I'm going to put this pulley back on. So I'm turning the shaft so that I can get at the screw, and we'll slide it on and line up the hole. And then we take this long Allen screw, which is actually threaded into the shaft. And we'll take a small screwdriver and tighten that down. Oops. Okay. And then the next step will be to install our new brushes. Now we have to be careful. There's a concave cut there that has to go in the correct orientation so that it's going to make surface contact with the commutator. And once that's on there, we put the plastic cap on. We definitely do not want to torque these caps on. A very light touch is all it takes. It's very easy to break those caps, and they're expensive to replace. If you break a cap and have to go get more, you pay $5 to $10 for a pair of these things. It's crazy. So I'm always real careful with the caps. So anytime I junk a machine, that's one of the parts that definitely gets saved. I save a ton of parts off a machine, but the brush caps for sure. Okay. Now the only thing left to do on this is the grease wicks. But before we do that, I want to give this motor a test drive. So the way I do that is I temporarily wire it up, and I'm just going to strip the ends here and attach them to my test cord and make sure this motor is running and sounding as it should. And give me a moment, I'll hook this up and we'll give it a test spin. Assuming everything's good, we'll do the final step with the grease wicks. Okay, so you can see I've wired on the leads to my test plug. In theory, I should be hooking this up to a foot controller, but I don't. I just run it to the motor. And as you can hear, that motor is really running well. It's nice and fast. That's what we want to hear. So that's great. So this motor is really going to perform well now. So let's disconnect these wires and go ahead and do the grease wicks, and then we will be ready to move on to the next step with this Featherweight. All right, so the last thing is the grease wicks. What I like to do is get them saturated with grease first. The way I do it is I simply put some on there and between my fingers roll them back and forth. You can also melt the grease. I know that's how Jen at Sewing Machine Rehab does it, which is a great method. She heats up a spoon with some of this in there and dips the wick in there. But I think this works almost as well. I'm just rubbing this back and forth, and the wick, that felt really soaks up the grease. By the way, the correct grease for these grease wicks is a special grease with a very low temperature melting point. So what happens is when the motor heats up to operating temperature, that operating temperature is just high enough to begin to melt the grease. So the grease then can transfer to the shafts and the motor. And it's really kind of a brilliant idea, because if the motor is running relatively friction-free, it won't generate enough heat to melt the wax. So the grease. So the grease only gets kind of pressed into service when the motor reaches a sufficiently high temperature. And so that's how the machine stays lubricated, or the felt stays lubricated. All right, so I've just dropped that first grease wick in. I'm going to put the spring in behind it, and I'm going to take my tube that goes over it, and we're going to just press that in. Okay, and then the same thing with the other one. I've got my preloaded grease wick. We drop it in. I put the spring in behind it, and I take this tube and press it in. I'm going to press that in just a little bit more further. There. So now this motor is all set. It's been lubricated and cleaned inside, and it's making great electrical contact. So I'm going to call that done. All right, the next thing we're going to do is there's some rust, and we need to do some cleaning in here on the nose of this machine. So we're going to do a little bit of disassembly. I'm going to put all my parts in a magnetic parts dish here. I'm just going to start by taking off. This is the piece that moves when the lifter lever goes up. This engages a pin in the upper tension assembly to release the tension discs. I'm going to take out both the needle bar and the pressure bar so that I can properly clean this part. I'll polish them both, and we'll put it back together. I'm not going to take everything out of here. The machine appears to be in really good shape. This is the spring for the pressure bar. This is the nut on top of the pressure bar. So I just simply need to loosen this, and that should allow me to take off the pressure bar. Okay. May have to give it a little bit of a nudge. I'm grabbing my non-marring pliers. Yeah, we're a little stuck here. I don't want to damage anything. So I'm going to try one more trick. I'm going to use a crescent wrench on the bottom here and see if I can twist this just to break that. It's frozen in that. There we go. Okay. Probably help put a little penetrating oil in there just to loosen things up. Let's give that another little spin there. There we go. Now she's coming loose. Okay. So we've got the pressure bar out and the pressure clamp we'll take out. Now let's go over here to the needle bar and get a smaller screwdriver for that screw right there. This is the clamp that holds the needle bar in. We'll loosen that. And we need to take off this clamp at the bottom, which holds the needle to the needle bar. And there it goes. Take that off. So now we can lift the needle bar right out. I'll polish that. And this is the piece I want to clear the rust off of. This is the clamp. And the rest of this, I've now got a lot more working room. I'll be able to wipe that out, clean that out inside. And we'll lubricate things before we put it back together. So I'm going to clean some parts here, polish these shafts and clean the rust off of that. And I'll be back when we're ready to put it back together. All right, so we're ready to put the nose back together. I have cleaned all the parts. I ran them through my ultrasonic parts cleaner. And things, this is the pressure bar. I've polished that on my buffing wheel. Similarly with the needle bar. The needle bar, it's really important this be clean. This is going up and down constantly when you're sewing. And so it's important that this be clean so that it runs with less friction through the bushings here and here. And there's also lines on here at the top, and there's an alignment mark on the front for getting it positioned correctly and for timing the hook. And it's very important that this be clean so you can see those lines. And then the part that was rusty, this is the clamp that holds the pressure bar. It fits into this little connecting rod here. I cleaned that with a wire wheel, and I've treated it with a rust preventative so it won't rust again. And what I like to use is a product called Fluid Fill. It's in aerosol cans. It comes in, this is a can with a brush on it. So I apply a layer, and then I wipe most of it off, so you're leaving a thin film. This really works well. I also put it on, this is a cast iron piece that is the pressure lifter, and that's prone to rust as well. So it's just to make sure that's not going to happen going forward. So the next thing we want to do is we want to get a little oil in the bushings so that when we assemble this, there'll be some lubrication on there. And the way I'm going to do that is to put a couple of drops of oil on one of these. These are long, they're like Kleenex, but they're on a wooden shaft. And so I can smear a little layer of oil and then reach down to this lower bushing and get a little oil into that. And then we're going to do the same on the pressure bar bushings, just so when that goes together, there's some lubricant in there. And one other spot we want to lubricate is on this connecting rod. That's another wear spot. In fact, there's an oil hole in it, so we will oil that afterwards. All right, so we've gotten some lubricant on there. I'm going to start with the needle bar. So we'll drop the needle bar through. Actually, I'm going to put my needle bar clamp in there. And this goes in, and the screw is on the left side. And now we can drop this clean needle bar through there. And down we go. And I'm going to move the action to the bottom of its stroke. And at the bottom of the stroke, we want to be at the top. We want that top timing mark to just be coming out of the bushing. And there's also an alignment mark, a vertical alignment mark, then there's an alignment mark on the clamp. So we have a couple of things to line up before need a different size screwdriver, before I tighten this clamp. So I'm going to get it sort of snug, and then I'm going to just, move that needle bar and get right at the top timing mark. Okay. Tighten that down. So now the needle bar is working very nice. I'm going to go ahead and put an additional drop of oil right there. And one more in the bushing up top. And that is great. And I can now also put a drop of oil in this oil hole on the connecting rod. And I'm going to mop. I got a little too much oil on there, so I'm mopping up the excess. Okay. And we can put the other parts on the bottom of the needle bar here in just a minute. But let's get the pressure bar in next. And the pressure bar goes through this block. And this block actually slides, this machined slot on the side of the case here is what that slides in. So we want a little bit of oil on this block. And I'm going to just put a little on and spread it here, okay? And I'm going to get a little bit on the top of the lifter because that's a friction point. And I'm going to try to get a little in that slot, which is a little tricky. Okay, so now I'm going to put that block in its slot and drop this through. Okay. And that's how that goes. I'm just going to loosely cinch that up just until we can get everything set up. The next part of the lifter is the rod and the spring, which I have cleaned. And that goes down into a hole there. and then our adjusting nut on the top. And I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on the threads. Line that up. I'll hold that with a pair of needle nose in position because there's a little spot for it to engage in the bottom of the. There it goes. Okay. And I can see the friction point here. I'm going to put a little bit more oil in there. There we go. When you're oiling, the key with oiling is not to put too much. The right amount of lubricant is just enough and no more, which is a hard thing to learn. And I learned that really working on clocks, because what you learn on clocks is that too much oil creates multiple problems. One of which is the extra oil provides something for dirt and dust, particularly dust in the air, to stick to. And over time, a clock will accumulate a lot of gritty material just as a result of pockets of oil, too much oil there. And the other thing that happens is in a clock, there's a very small divot where the oil, to hold a small amount of oil, a very small amount of oil. And if you put too much in, the oil starts to flow out, and capillary action basically pulls the oil out of that little oil sink, that depression. And so you go lightly on the oil. We want to make sure everything's lubricated, but we don't want to over lubricate. Okay, so the next thing we got to do is put our presser foot on there. I'm going to put that on, and the clearance is 5/16 of an inch between the plate and the presser bar. I've got a tapered piece of wood, and I've marked the point where it's 5/16 of an inch. Actually, I've got that just about perfect. I'm pushing it until it touches, and I'm at 5/16, which is, that almost never happens. So the other thing I got to do here is the presser foot is going at an angle, which means I've got to rotate this presser bar just slightly, just so it's straight. And we want it to be centered over the needle. I got to go a little further. Okay, that looks good. We're going to check the clearance again for 5/16. Whoop, I lost it. So now I'll show you how I do it. So I go to I'm pushing that up to the 5/16 and bringing my block down. Okay. There we are. So that's the presser bar. Put my gauge block away. The other thing we got to do is put the pieces on the bottom of the needle bar, and that is this needle clamp. And the tricky thing about the needle clamp is this piece that drops in there that gravity needs to help you. And to do that, I stand the machine up on end. So I got to go this way. And I don't know if that camera's going to show, but now I can drop this piece into, there's a pocket for it, and bring that up. And then there's a screw that goes on the end here. Now I've magnetized my screwdriver so it'll hold it. There we go. So that is basically, whoops, forgot an important part. We got to put this piece back in. This is, when the lifter is up, it takes the tension off the upper tension assembly. And that is held in with this screw right here. put it on the screw here. There we go. And I'm going to put a drop of oil on that pivot point. Okay. And now when the lifter reaches the top, you can see that it's pushing the tension discs out. That's exactly right. So that takes care of the nose of the machine. The only other thing left to do is to oil all these little points here. I actually did that when the camera wasn't rolling. So I've already lubricated the front, and I wiped out and I took my swabs, cleansed one of these, and cleaned out the inside just so it looks nice. And now we've got nicely polished up presser bar and needle bar, so they're going to operate with minimum friction, which is what we want, and they're nice and shiny, which looks good too. So there you go. That's how we take care of the nose. Okay, the next thing we want to do is remove the hook, because I want to thoroughly clean that hook and also the bobbin case. So I'm going to take the hook out, and then we're going to disassemble the hook and the bobbin case, and I'll show you how we deal with that. So the first thing we got to do is take this needle plate off. Often these screws to hold the needle plate on are chewed up. These look good. Okay. And we'll remove the needle plate. I'm just going to set that in one of my magnetic dishes. There's the screws. So now we want to remove the hook. I've already taken, there's no needle in the machine. If there was a needle in there, we would need to take that out, get that out of the way. So to remove the hook, I'm going to stand this machine up on end. Maybe have to aim you up a little bit. And now there's actually two set screws on the bottom of this hook. They're on opposite sides of the hook. We got to loosen those. And then we'll turn the hook to the other direction and loosen that one. And then the hook can be lifted out. So there's our hook. All right, so I'm going to reset the camera here, and we'll disassemble the hook and the bobbin case. Okay, we're ready to disassemble this hook. I'm going to start by flipping it over here, and I'm going to remove the two set screws. Everything's going to go through my ultrasonic cleaner here in just a few minutes once we get everything apart. And I'm using a magnetic dish because you'll see there's some very tiny screws. All right, now this piece here that I'm removing is called the thread guard, and it attaches to the back of the hook. And when I take this off, well, there's a little bit of rust under there. I'm going to have to clean this. I'm not sure if that's, yeah, it is. No, it's like dried lint. It's not rust. Okay, what you often see on the bottom of these thread guards is it's all scratched, because what happens sometimes is the needle gets bent and pushes in between the needle plate, or rather in between the hook and the thread guard, and it will create gouges and scratches in here. And when that's the case, we've got to file and sand and buff and smooth that back out. This is a hardened material. This is not what will scratch. What scratches is the back of this thread guard. And this one is unscratched. I don't think I've ever seen one. I've taken many, many hooks apart, and I've never seen one this clean, which is amazing. All right, so that's everything on the bottom of the hook. Now, if we flip it over, there's a screw that holds this, what's called the jib. Some people pronounce it the gib. I think it's correctly pronounced jib. We take this first screw out, and it's a small screw. We don't want to lose it. And when you do that, that allows this jib to pivot out. And when it's pivoted out, we can then take the centerpiece of this hook out. It has to be in the right position where this finger is opposite the jib, and that will lift out. And we're seeing this hook is in not bad shape, but I definitely want to clean that and polish that out inside. And then there's one more screw we have to take out, which is on the back here, that holds that jib in. And we'll use a fine screwdriver and get that last screw. And then there's the jib. So now our hook is completely disassembled. I can see quite a bit of lint and dirt. This is gonna perform much better when it's all cleaned and polished. I see no corrosion or rust, which is great. Now we're going to go to the bobbin case, and we're going to take this apart. And this has even smaller screws, so we got to be really on guard here when we take this apart. The first screw that comes off is on the inside of the bobbin case. There's a little screw that retains this finger latch. And so we're going to take that screw out. I've magnetized my screwdriver so the screws will stick to it, but that is a tiny, tiny little screw, as you can see. So again, I'm going to put that there in my magnetic dish. Now we can lift the finger guard, and this latch assembly will slide off. And there's a little spring that's underneath here riding in a groove, and we're going to take that spring out too. And then the other part that comes off is this tension spring. This is the spring that creates the tension on the bobbin thread. And there's a retaining screw that holds it, and an adjusting screw where you adjust the tension. Wow, that retaining screw is tight. Does not want to budge. I'm going to try a little bit bigger screwdriver. There we go. Wow, I've never had one quite that tight. And then this larger screw in the middle of this tension spring is how you adjust the tension. So we'll take that off. And now we can take the spring out, the tension spring. And there's the body of our bobbin case. There's actually one more part that I typically clean, which is this assembly that's on the bottom of the needle plate is what catches this finger that's in the hook, rides in there. And this is often needs to be cleaned and polished. This one actually looks quite good, but I'm going to go ahead, since we're going this far, I'm going to take this off, and we'll just run those parts through the cleaner as well while we're at it. We got it off the machine. Let's do it right. I think, see, now this will come off. Those screws will drop out, and then there are two more small screws on the front. Come on. There we go. Okay, so that is all of the parts. These are, in my opinion, these are the most critical parts on the sewing machine, because these are the parts where the stitch forms. The needle brings that thread down, and then as the needle starts to go back up, there's slack in the thread, and as the needle comes up, it creates a loop on the side of the needle. The hook comes around and grabs that thread and brings the bobbin thread around the bobbin case. So that piece of thread is actually running across the hook and across the face of the bobbin case. And any nicks or scratches or dirt that are on the hook or on the bobbin case can catch that thread as it's coming around to form that stitch. And so we really want all of these parts of anything on the machine, the parts that are most critical to be clean and smooth and polished, are the bobbin case and hook assembly. And if we do that and reassemble and adjust everything well, I can expect that this machine is really going to stitch beautifully. So that's the next step. So I'm going I'm going to run all these parts through my ultrasonic cleaner, and then we'll polish them up and put it back together. I'll show you that part after we've cleaned and dried these parts. Okay, you can see here I've got all these parts cleaned. Off camera, I ran everything through my ultrasonic cleaner, and then I rinse, and then my parts dryer. And then I took my rotary tool, a couple of different wire brush types, and I've polished up the inside and the body and all the nooks and crannies on the hook, on the bobbin case main body. This is the inner part of the hook that the bobbin case attaches to. The jib, which is the part of the hook that locks this piece in, and the needle plate I've cleaned and polished. And then all these are in this magnetic dish are all the screws and small parts. So let's do some reassembly. All right, so let's put the hook back together. I'm going to start here. The hook is one of the easier pieces to do. I'm going to start by putting this jib arm back in, which goes in here, and then the screw goes in from the bottom. And each of the screws, even though we have a lot of little tiny screws here, each of the screws looks slightly different, so you can't really mix them up, which is great. So I know I've got the jib screw here, and okay. So now that hinges like it's supposed to. Great. We can drop the bobbin case support piece back in, and I'm going to close the jib, and there's another screw that goes in right there, which is this one right here, and that will keep the jib closed. Now, one of the things that's very important, when the machine is running, this little finger that you see on right here is captured by the assembly that goes on the bottom of the needle plate. We'll put that together shortly. And then the hook is spinning. So these two parts, one is stationary and the other is spinning. So they have to be lubricated. And there's this little channel that this runs in is called the hook race. And that race needs oil, which is why on the edge of that inner piece, there's these little notches. And I'm going to swing this around and expose those notches. Those notches are to carry a small amount of oil around in the hook race. And when you're oiling your featherweight, this is one of the most important things to oil is the hook race, because this is a high-speed part, and if that's not adequately lubricated, that will be generating heat and friction, which is not good. And you want to wipe any excess. If you get more oil on there than you intended, wipe it off. Okay, so now that is all in perfect shape. I'm going to flip this over, and on the back goes this thread guard. And this one, like I said, this is the nicest thread guard I have ever seen. I'm going to set that on there, and we rotate it until we line up the screw hole. And we tighten that down, okay? And we can put our two set screws back in on the shaft here. We'll leave them sticking out. Okay, so that hook that's done. That's ready to reinstall on the machine. Let's move on to the assembly that's on the bottom of the cover here. And that's this, I think it's cast aluminum. And it holds these little spring steel pieces. Which are held on with these screws. we'll attach that to the bottom of this plate. These screws. Okay, that's all done. Ready to go. So what we have left is the bobbin case. And again, I have cleaned this out thoroughly inside and polished it up. We're going to attach the spring that provides the thread tension. And I've been very careful to polish the inside edge of that. So we drop the front, which has these little hooks on it, into that slot. And then we're going to grab the screw that has right here. This is the one I had trouble taking out because it was so tight. There we go. And I'm not going to snug it up all the way yet because I got to get, this is the adjusting screw, another small screw. And once that's in, there we go. We'll adjust the thread tension a little later. Now I can tighten up this one, okay? And on the top, we've got to put this little spring in here. And I like to add just a touch of oil, tiny bit, not even a full drop, just enough to moisten the edge of that spring. And then the slide goes in. You gotta have the lifter finger up. And we push it in with our finger, with my thumb on the back, and once you've gone far enough, you can drop the latch. And then we turn it over and we put the retaining screw in. And this is the smallest screw on the Featherweight. I'm always afraid of losing that little guy. Okay, and that when you lift the finger, if you didn't have that retaining screw in there, this could slide right back out. So now everything's back together. These can go back on the machine. All right, we're back under the machine here. If you remember, this balance for the counterbalance for the hook has got rust on it, and I definitely want to clean that up. So what I'm going to do here is just use my rotary tool, and I'm going to just brush this while I slowly rotate it. Okay, that got the rust off of there. Let's put a little rust prevention. Again, I'm going to use my favorite rust preventive solvent, which is fluid film. And I get nothing for recommending this, but I recommend it without hesitation. So just put a little bit of fluid film on there. I'll put it on this shaft too. And then I literally put it on and wipe it off. And it leaves just a microscopic film, which is kind of in the surface of the metal there. And that has a really good rust inhibiting set of properties. Okay, now the other thing we needed to do on the bottom here, the bottom of this machine was surprisingly clean. I just wiped out with a shop towel a little bit of down here and needed really nothing. The other thing, I've already done the oiling, but just let me show you now with my needle oil. I'll show you the points that we oil. So there are oil ports for this lower shaft. This lower shaft is spinning at high speeds. It's really important. That point and that point need to be oiled regularly. And on the top of the machine, the oil points for the upper shaft, which are right here and right here. Those are critical to keep oiled. Also, there's a connecting rod cap with an oil hole in it you want to put oil in. And on either side of this cam and the fork, this controls your stitch length. They need to be bathed in a film of oil, so you put drops of oil on top of that too. So I've already taken care of that on the top. And on the bottom, the pivot points that connect to the rock shaft need oil. That's this one and this one, so there's places to put oil on both of those. The ends of the rock shafts, this one here, here, and here. There's a little connector that goes up here to the feed dogs, and those are oil points. And then there's another set of oil points on this feed dog small shaft here in the back. It's very hard to see, and I've got my needle oiler. That's why it's nice to have an oiler with a long needle spout, so you can reach those tough to oil spots. So that's taken care of that. So this machine now is all oiled, which is great. I've been able to give it a full lube. The earlier featherweights with the gear train, you can kind of spin them, and you can see it'll keep going for a little bit after you stop spinning the hand wheel. The ones with the belt don't do that. The belt just doesn't freewheel like that. But we've gotten the friction way down now on this machine, so it's spinning with very little resistance, which is great. So I expect this is going to run very nicely, particularly now that we've overhauled the motor. So the next thing I need to do is we're going to put this over on the other bench. I want to work on getting this tape and tape residue and this shadow from a sticker off the front here. So that's going to be the next step. And then we'll use some polishing compound and some wax to just give this a nice shine. And after that, we're going to work on the foot controller. We'll put the hook assembly back in, and we'll check the hook timing, which is really important. We'll adjust the thread tension on the bobbin case, and then we'll be ready to test and make some other adjustments. For example, there's adjustments for the feed dogs, how they center in the slots in this plate this needle plate is very important, and the height of the feed dogs is very important. So those are adjustments we can check. The hook timing we're also going to check. There's an adjustment for the check spring. We'll adjust that. So we'll get this machine all the way back to its factory specs, so that it's going to really run very, very nicely. And then we'll move our attention to the case. So the next thing we want to do is we want to get this dried masking tape off of here. And I'm going to use kerosene for that. I've got this is a bottle I rigged up with a spout. And I'm just going to put a little bit of kerosene on there just to soften things. Doesn't take much. And kerosene is not going to harm the finish. Now, you can use anything that's hard enough to scrape the masking tape, but softer than the paint. You don't want to use a metal scraper here because you'll scratch the paint. So I'm actually using a small block of wood. This happens to be maple, which is pretty hard as far as woods go, and it's got a pretty good edge on it. Another thing that works pretty well is the edge of a credit card. But don't use a putty knife because that metal blade's going to scratch it. So I'm going to use the kind of the edge of my piece of wood here. And this actually is working pretty well. I don't know how well you can see that, but I'm kind of working my way along that piece of tape. Just kind of going back and forth. See, I've got most of that piece off. Again, go come at it from the other direction here. Now that worked really, really well. And it even seemed to scrape up the adhesive that's on the bottom of the tape. So I think we've successfully removed that piece. I'm going to just add a little more solvent to this other one, and we'll work our way onto this one, get this one off as well. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. That worked really, really well. All right, so I'm gonna take a little bit of kerosene on a clean piece of shop towel. Here's a piece of blue shop towel. I'm gonna put a little more kerosene on there. And when you look in the light, if you kind of have a light behind you, you can see, I can see a couple spots where there's a little bit of that residue still on there. And I think the rest of that's going to polish up with some polishing compound. So let's see what we can do on this here. This one's a little bit more stubborn. I'm going to add a little more here to my shop towel. Sometimes what it pays to do is just get some on there and give it some time. Go do something else for a few minutes and come back. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to leave that with some kerosene on there, and we'll come back in a few minutes and see what happens. And in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chase the threads here so that if you want to put a seam guide on there in the future, there's no residue of gunk in there. And I've got a tap that's the right thread, which is it's a number 6 thread at a 40 threads per inch, or a pitch of 40, so a 6x40 tap. And by the way, that's a screw you will not find at your local hardware store. A fine thread screw at the hardware store is going to be a number 6x32 threads per inch, not 40. So you won't be able to replace any of these screws from your hardware store. Singer manufactured their own screws, which is kind of amazing. And so now those threads are nice and clean. And so when Catherine goes to attach a thread guide here, and this machine actually came with one in the accessory box. Here it is. And it's even got the proper screw to hold it down. So that will go right there. So there you go. So let me put my thread, my cap as it's called, away. We'll take this back off. Put that back in the accessory box. Let's see how our... Well, it's coming slowly. I think I'm going to have to just keep working at this, give it a little more time, and come back at it several more times, and we'll get that off of there. And then I'll be able to take polishing compound to the machine, and then give it a little bit of wax, and it's going to look really, really nice. All right. All right, the next thing we're going to do is put these new rubber feet on the controller, check out the interior of the controller, make sure everything's working as it should. Let's take the cover off. This controller looks really nice. I usually have to buff these to get them shiny again, but this one looks great. I don't think this has had much use, but these rubber feet were leaving marks on the bed, and that's a sure sign that it's time for new feet. And I get mine from the Featherweight shop. There's a pack of new feet. This is a pretty easy process. I'm normally rewiring these at the same time, but this one does not need to be rewired. The wiring is fine on it, so I'll leave that as is. In fact, it's still attached to the machine over here. I didn't even disconnect it. So here's what the controller looks like when you take the cover off. Oh, this screw is not in the little slot there where it belongs. Let's fix that. Okay, and the feet just kind of slip on, so we'll take those and discard those. Here's the screws, we need those. I'm going to just brush out. There's a little bit of dust in here, not bad. This controller looks fantastic. Yeah, and there's an adjustment you can make about the contacts here. I just got to give it a visual. When you've pressed fully, the contact, this piece should be hitting the contact. So it's using electrical resistance for the lower speeds, and when you get to full speed, these contacts are bridging these copper strips, and so you're getting complete contact without any electrical resistance when you floor it, so to speak. All right. We'll put the new feet on. And these you just slide on here, like so. I'm just going to brush the dust out of the inside of the cover here. And this little foot thing. Okay, the other thing I like to do is put a drop of oil on the pivot points in here. Okay, and then I will slide the electrical piece in here. And that's it. I'll just put the screws back in. That's it. All right, so yesterday I got the tape off the bed and that residue from adhesive of a sticker here. And off camera, I went over the paint job with some polishing compound and a rag. And then went back and waxed it, and this case looks absolutely gorgeous. It looks really, really nice. There's no significant scratches, no chips. It's really beautiful. And the hand wheel is essentially perfect. So this cleaned up spectacularly. I'm really happy with that. So what we have left to do is we've got to put the motor back in and reconnect the wires. I do have these are the type of electrical crimp connectors that Singer used. And now I just dropped that. Oh, here it is. And we got to put the hook back in. We'll put the belt on, and we'll check the timing and some other adjustments related to the feed dogs, and then we'll be ready to test stitch with this thing. So let's go ahead and get the hook back in. To do that, I'm going to put a needle in. I always go with a new needle. We'll raise the thing up. The flat goes this way. The easy way to remember on a featherweight is that the base of the needle kind of matches the needle plate. So the shape of that needle plate kind of tells you which way the needle goes in the machine. I'm just making sure I get it up all the way. Okay, so now we've got the needle in, and now we can put the hook back on. The hook has 2 set screws. And there is a flat on one side of the shaft here, so we rotate it to the flat, and we want the hook, the set screw, to be on that flat. That generally gets the timing correct, unless something has disturbed the timing on the machine. So now let me bring this around and see how we're doing on the timing. Okay, and I will just lightly tighten up the other side. We'll tighten those up fully once we've checked the timing. Okay, so what we want to do, if you're not familiar with the way the hook timing works on a featherweight, is these marks on the needle bar at the top. So we come down, at the bottom of the stroke, the top mark is showing. We continue rotating the hand wheel until the top mark, the bottom mark is there, and at that point the top of the hook should be at the needle, and that's dead on. So we're great. So the timing is correct on this machine. We don't even have to adjust anything. I'm just going to tighten up these 2 screws fully so that the hook can't move, and that takes care of that. I do want to put the needle plate back on, and we want to check some adjustments with the feed dogs. So we'll grab our needle plate, and remember on a featherweight, this little finger that's on the center, on the carrier for the bobbin case, that needs to be at the top and fall between these slots on the needle plate. There we go. If you don't do that, it definitely is not going to sew. So let's attach our needle plate. I like to start the screws with my fingers just to make sure they're in the threads correctly. And and then I use a nice long screwdriver to get these in. And these don't need to be torqued down particularly tight. Snug is kind of the watchword there. So we get those down snug. Okay. Now what we want to do is check the feed dog height. And what Singer says is we want 80% of the teeth to be above the needle plate. So I'm just doing a visual here and looking to see if we have about 80% of the tooth height up there, and we do. That looks really good. The other thing is to check the alignment of the feed dogs in the slots that are in the needle plate. There's a left to right adjustment, and if that has to be adjusted, we move the rock shaft, but that looks good. And then there's an adjustment if we go to maximum stitch length. we want the feed dogs at the back of the stroke to be close to the slot here. And if we reverse, we can see the same thing. So this all looks good. I don't need to make any adjustments to the feed dogs. If I have had the rock shafts out, then those obviously need adjusting, but this looks really, really good. There's one other adjustment that's related to this check spring, and to adjust that, we're going to move this little screw here, but we gotta wait till we're stitching with that, because we have to have it threaded up to make that adjustment. Another thing I did off camera last night was I disassembled the upper tension assembly and just inspected everything, made sure the tension discs looked smooth and everything was great. I just checked it out and put it back together really didn't have to do anything to it. So this is now ready to have the motor put back in. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put the front cover back on, because we're done with adjustments here in the front. And the way the cover mounts on these, this screw here engages in this slot, so there's an adjustment here to make sure it's not loose on the front. If there's any play in that, that's beautiful right there. But if there was any play in that, I could just turn that screw one way or the other. And we'll put the thumb screw on. Okay. So the machine, and you can see I've got the top cover back on. Also off camera, I polished up this chowdered screw here. I was actually trying to make a video of show you the process I used to do that, but when I looked at the video I had shot, it was out of focus. I was really disappointed. I had it zoomed in quite a bit, and it was just out of focus. So, and now the work is done. I can't undo it. I can't go and repeat that process, but you can see I've cleaned up that chowdered screw and polished it, so it looks great. So now let's put the motor back in and reconnect the wires. And what we got to do is feed the wires down. The motor mounts this way, so we're going to feed these wires through. This plastic sleeve needs to be right in the point where the wires are going through the machine. Like so. Okay. And now I can tip this up, and we'll put the screw in to mount this machine. It's got a flat washer on it. And I've got a new belt. I get my belts from the Featherweight shop. This is what they call their super belt. They actually sell a white belt. If some people want to use a white belt on a white Featherweight, it's considerably more expensive. I don't see any reason for it. But anyway, what I find is with the super belt, you do not need much tension on it. And I'm generally at the top of the slot here. If I loosen the motor and push down, that would put more tension on the belt. But there's plenty of tension on it with the motor at the top of the slot. It doesn't need to be very tight, and when you tighten it up more, it adds more resistance, and so it reduces the speed that the machine can operate. All right, so let's reconnect those wires, and you'll see that this is one of the 2 points where the wires go. So I'm going to cut that connection off. And we will strip the wire. All right, and that is ready to join with this one. And this one gets the smaller of those two connectors. And we will then crimp that. Okay, so that's done, and then the other one is got 3 wires coming into it, so we need the larger connector for that one. And I'll cut these other ones. Okay. We'll strip those wires. And now we can twist these together. And add this third one. Push on this connector. Okay. And that's ready for a crimp. Okay. That all looks good. Let's put some tools away here. And let's test this out. Light, and we got our foot controller. I think we're ready to thread this thing up and test it out. But before we do that, I'm going to push the wiring all back into its spot here. Got to kind of scrunch it in there like so. And then this bottom cover, I didn't have to do anything, just wipe it off with a rag. It's in really nice shape. And this cover goes on just like that. Again, these white featherweights do not have a felt pad that absorbs drips on the bottom. It's just this piece of masonite. And there's also no felt washer underneath like the black featherweights have. So that's it on the bottom. And this machine is, other than I'm gonna wind a bobbin and set the tension to 23 grams and do some test stitching. And I think this will be ready to return to my customer. Okay, I want to adjust the tension on the bobbin here. So I've wound a bobbin. And when you put the bobbin in the bobbin case, this is true of any bobbin case, if you look, there's a slot right here where the thread drops in, and you can use that as an indicator for which way the bobbin goes in. So we want the bobbin looking like that slot. If I had it this way, it'd be opposite the slot. So this is the way it goes, which actually seems a little counterintuitive, because as the bobbin is unwinding, it's kind of pulling in the opposite direction of the rotation of the thread. But that's the way it goes. So now I'm going to use a bobbin tension, a thread tension adjuster here, and I'm going to attach it to the thread. This is the one they sell at the Singer Featherweight shop, and it's in ounces on one side and grams on the other. And the correct tension on the bobbin is 23 grams. And so I'm just holding the bobbin loosely and pulling down. And my gauge is reading around 25 to 26. So I'm going to back this screw off a little bit. And I'm going to just move my thread back down. And you hold the bobbin, the gauge by this ring. And the thread is supporting the gauge. So then I just pull down on it, and you can see, when the thread is kind of running smoothly, I'm pretty good there. I'm going to tighten it up just a touch. And I'll check it one more time. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. So now I can put this bobbin in the machine and thread up the upper side, and we can test it out and see how it works. Okay, so I've got the machine threaded up. I like to do a different color thread in the bobbin from the top so I can check the quality of the stitch. I've got yellow in the bobbin and orange in the top, and I'm going to be stitching through this blue shop towel, and those two colors show up quite well. So I've already threaded the machine here. We're going to put that in, and I'll take my foot controller here. And let's see how that stitch looks. There's the top. There's the bottom. That looks fantastic. I don't even think I need to make any tension adjustments. I can see the bobbin thread just at the point of the stitch here, and I can see the top thread just at the point of stitch here. And I'm on about 3.5, which is great. I'm actually I'm gonna turn this. I'd like it to be reading 4 when I'm at the correct tension. So I'm gonna back this off and move my dial. There's these little holes in the pin there. So now when I'm on 4, let's check it again. That's called zeroing out the gauge on the tension knob. Yeah, that looks great. So this is going to be at 4 to get a really nice quality stitch. Let's try the different stitch lengths here. With a longer stitch, any tension problems will be more evident, and this is generating a really nice looking stitch. Let me just show you here. So that's at like 6 per inch. You can see there's a very nice stitch on the top, and the bottom looks great as well. So I'm able to see a little bit of the yellow bobbin thread here, and I can see a little bit of the orange top thread on this side. So that's ideal. I think this machine, other than cleaning up the case, which we will do here, all I'm going to do really with the case is, this is the case. Again, there is a spot here I need to glue back down, and I'm just going to wash it and give it a quick wipe with just a touch of tongue oil. You've seen me do that in another video. So I think we're going to call this a wrap. This machine will be ready to return to Catherine, and she got herself a really, really nice white featherweight on an eBay auction, because you're rolling the dice when you do that. You're looking at it only with the photos and description of the seller, and you can't be sure of what you've got until you have it in your hands and can look it over. But she got lucky, and so I think she's going to really enjoy this machine. All right, that concludes this episode. Thanks for watching.